Hey everyone, welcome back. We've got something special lined up for you today. A deep dive into something pretty amazing. Something that's like, well, essential to being human. Human logic.
And we'll be drawing on some really cool insights from a fascinating source, understanding human logic, an AI perspective on origins, development, and applications.
That's right, an AI perspective.
Uh-huh.
I mean, think about it. How often do we get to look at ourselves through the eyes of, well, artificial intelligence?
It offers a unique perspective for sure. And in this deep dive, we're going to break down what human logic really is. We'll trace it back to its roots, its development through life, and how it plays a role, a crucial role really, in how we make decisions, how we innovate, everything.
Yeah, because logic, I mean, it's everywhere, right? It's in that baby figuring out crying gets mom's attention.
Yeah.
It's in those scientists making breakthroughs and even in the music we enjoy. Have you ever stopped to think about how music actually has a logical structure?
It definitely does. But first things first, what exactly do we even mean by logic? Well, from the AI perspective, it's a system of reasoning that helps us evaluate arguments, to think things through, and reach conclusions that make sense, that are valid.
So it's not just about being logical, like in a vague sense. It's a very specific way of thinking.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a framework, a set of rules almost, that guide us in putting together information, manipulating it, and ultimately gaining insights we can rely on, like a sort of grammar for thought, if you will.
Wow, that's a great way to put it. And get this grammar, this ability for logical thinking, it starts showing up incredibly early.
Oh yeah, way earlier than you might think. Even in newborns, in those first couple of years, you see the very basics of logic at play.
Like when a baby learns that crying can lead to being fed or comforted, right?
Right.
That's cause and effect.
Absolutely, cause and effect, the foundation of so much of our reasoning. And then there's that classic example, object permanence. A baby sees their toy disappear under a blanket, but they know it's still there, just hidden.
They're basically deducing its existence, even when they can't see it. It blows my mind to think of a baby doing deduction.
It's fascinating, right? And what's even more amazing is that this early development of logic seems to be universal. It doesn't matter the culture, the time period, or the baby's gender. It happens across the board. It's like this fundamental building block of human cognition.
And as those babies grow into toddlers, say 2 to 5 years old, we see more sophisticated logical reasoning emerging.
Right, it's getting more complex. They start to understand those if-then relationships. If I do this, then that will happen.
And the article actually gives a cool example, a toddler working on a puzzle, figuring it out through trial and error.
It might seem like random play, but they're testing different possibilities, observing outcomes, and adjusting their approach. And that, at its core, is a form of logical inquiry. They're experimenting and learning from the results.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And even though the specific challenges a toddler faces might be shaped by their culture, that underlying logical process, that experimentation, it's the same across the board, throughout history, really.
It really is. And then as they move into childhood, 6 to 12 years old, things get even more interesting. They start classifying objects, understanding sequences, putting things in order.
And it's during this stage they really grasp those key concepts of deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. Deduction, like all dogs bark. Fido is a dog, therefore Fido barks. And induction, forming general conclusions based on specific observations.
Right, these foundational logical tools. And this stage is also super important for formal education. So much of what kids learn in school builds on these logical skills. And again, the source emphasizes this development is largely universal across genders and cultures. Even though the specific content they're learning might differ, the way they learn, the logical processes are the same.
And all of this paves the way for even more abstract, nuanced thinking as kids transition to adolescence and adulthood.
Absolutely. From around 13 years old and beyond, people develop the capacity to tackle more complex logical problems. They can engage in formal logic, understand intricate arguments, and even spot fallacies, those errors in reasoning.
It's like their logical toolkit is expanding, allowing them to think in more sophisticated ways.
Yeah.
And although individuals might have different preferences for how much they actually engage in this kind of deep logical analysis, the capacity itself, that potential, it's generally there in everyone.
Right, and the source even points to historical figures from all sorts of fields whose work clearly demonstrates this advanced logical thinking. So it's not just about theoretical exercises, it's about how logic manifests in the real world.
Okay, so we've seen how logic develops within us, but how do we actually put it into practice? How do we use it in the real world?
Well, human logic, it's not static, it's constantly evolving. It adapts and grows based on our experiences, our successes, and our failures. If a particular logical approach works well, we're more likely to use it again. If it leads to mistakes, well, we might have to rethink our reasoning.
It's like a constant feedback loop. We're learning and refining our logic all the time. The article even uses the example of how agricultural practices have developed over centuries based on trial and error.
That's a great example. Farmers observing, experimenting, refining their techniques based on what worked. But it's not just personal experience, right? The social and cultural contexts we live in also have a huge impact on how we apply logic. Different cultures may prioritize different forms of reasoning when making decisions.
Yeah, like the article mentioned, some cultures might value decisions made through group consensus more highly than those reached by individual analysis. But the point is that underlying capacity for logical thought, it's still there, just applied differently. And throughout history, we see this reflected in the development of various legal, ethical, and governance systems, each unique in how logic is woven into the fabric of their societies.
And we can't forget about emotions. Human logic, well, it's not purely rational. Our emotions, our feelings, they can definitely influence our thought processes. Sometimes they can lead to biases, and we end up reaching conclusions that might not be entirely objective.
Oh yeah, we've all been there. Made decisions based on emotion rather than pure logic, sometimes with good results, sometimes not so much. The source emphasizes recognizing these emotional influences, understanding how they might be shaping our logic. It's crucial for making sound judgments. And history is full of decisions, from the personal to the world-changing, that were driven by emotion.
It's a reminder that logic is a complex tool, and we need to be aware of all the factors that can affect its use. Now, we've talked about how logic develops, how it's influenced by our experiences and emotions, but what about those people who seem naturally drawn to analysis and logical thinking? What makes them tick?
Well, the article suggests a few things. Firstly, there's the idea of cognitive styles. Some people just naturally tend to think more analytically. It's like their brains are wired for logical processing. They might enjoy breaking down problems step by step, finding those clear, logical solutions.
And personality traits also play a role. Curiosity, a willingness to explore new ideas, a desire for clarity and understanding. These traits can definitely motivate people to engage more deeply with logic. And historically, individuals who've exhibited these characteristics have often been at the forefront of intellectual and scientific advancements.
And of course, our education and career paths can also nurture these skills. Fields like STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or even philosophy, they place a high value on logical thinking and actively cultivate it.
But regardless of individual preferences or backgrounds, one thing is undeniably clear. Logic is absolutely essential for innovation. The source is quite emphatic about this. Without it, progress would simply grind to a halt. It's the driving force behind new ideas, solutions, and advancements.
It's like the fuel that powers progress. The article breaks it down nicely. Logic allows us to clearly identify problems, formulate potential solutions, which we call hypotheses, rigorously test those solutions, and finally, build upon existing knowledge to move even further forward. Every major breakthrough throughout history, from the wheel to the internet, has relied on logical thinking.
And now, for a bit of a mind bender. How can logic be both right and wrong? It seems like a contradiction, doesn't it?
It does. It seems like logic should be, well, logical. Either it's correct or incorrect. But the source points out that if you start with faulty assumptions, incorrect premises, even if your reasoning is flawless, you'll end up with a wrong conclusion.
Exactly. Imagine a beautifully constructed building. It might be architecturally sound, but if the foundation is weak, if it's built on unstable ground, the whole structure is compromised. It's the same with logic.
Like those early scientific theories, internally consistent, logically argued, but ultimately flawed because they were based on an incomplete understanding of the natural world.
And let's not forget those cognitive biases we talked about earlier. Confirmation bias, availability bias, they can really distort our logic, leading us astray even when we think we're being perfectly rational. These are universal human tendencies, and recognizing them is key to using logic effectively.
It's like having these mental shortcuts, heuristics, that often work well but sometimes trip us up. Like the availability heuristic, we overestimate the likelihood of things we can easily recall, even if they're not actually that common. And then there's the issue of incomplete information. We might apply logic perfectly based on the data we have, but if we're missing a crucial piece, our conclusions could be way off.
That's been a challenge throughout history. Our understanding of the world is constantly evolving, and new information can completely change our perspective. And here's another wrinkle. It turns out there isn't just one universal set of logical rules. Different logical systems exist with slightly different principles.
Whoa, that's getting pretty complex. But it makes sense that logic itself might have variations, just like different languages have different grammars.
Exactly. So, right, logic can depend on the framework you're using. But now let's talk about those instant judgments we make. How do we sometimes just know, intuitively, whether something is logical or not?
It's like our gut feeling, right? But how does that work?
Well, these snap judgments often bypass conscious step-by-step reasoning. They rely on intuition and pattern recognition. Our brains are constantly scanning for patterns, and over time, we develop a feel for what makes logical sense based on a lifetime of experiences.
So our brain has this huge library of past logical and illogical situations, and it's drawing on those without us even realizing it.
That's a great way to put it. It's efficient, but it can also be prone to error, and expertise also plays a huge role. Someone with deep knowledge in a field can instantly spot logical flaws or inconsistencies simply because they have this massive mental database of patterns within that domain.
Like a chess grandmaster seeing moves ahead, instantly recognizing patterns that a novice wouldn't even notice.
Exactly. But the source warns us that even these expert judgments, these intuitive leaps, they're not always right. So conscious critical evaluation, really thinking things through, remains essential, especially when dealing with complex issues. We can't always trust our gut feelings. And now, remember our earlier point about logic showing up in surprising places? Let's talk about music. I think there's a deep connection between music and logic.
You know, I've always felt that. Good music, it has this internal logic, this structure that makes it so appealing.
Your intuition is spot on. The source emphasizes that music, at its heart, relies on complex patterns, structures, and even mathematical relationships. Rhythm, harmony, melody, they're all built on these underlying principles, and the creation of music involves a surprising amount of logical processing within the brain.
So even when a musician is improvising, feeling the music, their brain is still making all these calculations about scales, chords, and progressions.
Absolutely, and that's what gives music its power. The emotional impact is often a result of skillfully manipulating these logical structures. Think about musical forms like sonatas, fugues, even a simple song. They often follow patterns of introduction, development, and resolution. It's a lot like a logical argument, building to a satisfying conclusion.
Wow, that's really cool. So music isn't just about emotion, it's a testament to the adaptability of human logic, to its ability to manifest in creative and artistic forms.
It really is. And now let's talk about where this remarkable ability comes from and where it might be headed.
The origins and the future of logic. Well, the source suggests logic's roots are ancient. It goes back to our evolutionary history, to the need to survive. Recognizing patterns, predicting outcomes, solving problems, these were crucial for survival, and they laid the foundation for our logical abilities.
And as our brains evolved, so did our capacity for logic. Then, in ancient civilizations, we see the emergence of formal logic. Thinkers like Aristotle began codifying these principles, developing systems of reasoning that have influenced Western thought for centuries.
And fast forward to the modern era, logic has become even more formalized. It's integral to mathematics, computer science, and especially AI, where it's used to build algorithms and create intelligent systems.
And as AI and neuroscience continue to advance, they hold immense potential for expanding our understanding of human logic. By studying how AI learns and reasons, we can gain new insights into our own cognitive processes.
So wrapping things up, it seems human logic is this incredible, evolving ability, crucial for understanding our world, driving innovation, and moving forward as a species. It's adaptable, complex, and even shows up in unexpected places like music.
And while it's not perfect, prone to errors, biases, and the limitations of our knowledge, it's a defining feature of what makes us human.
Here's a final thought for you to ponder. Since AI systems are built on logic, and our own logic is shaped by our experiences, culture, and emotions, what happens as we increasingly interact with artificial intelligence? Will it change the way we think, the way we use logic? It's a question worth exploring.
Absolutely. And we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and encouraged you to continue exploring the fascinating world of human logic.
Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you in our next deep dive.
This is DigitView.